Now, there was a rule put in place, back in 1954, 59, something. What's that rule called? The Johnson rule? The Johnson rule, where 64, is that when it was? In 64, the Johnson rule that made it illegal for churches to talk about politics or to support a political candidate. Churches are not allowed to support a political candidate. That was a rule. You know why that rule came to be? That rule came to be because what you might not know is the largest organized group. It's funny that they use the word organized because I would not use that word, but that's it. We'll talk about it more in a moment. But the largest organized entity in the United States is those who call themselves Christians. So the power of the church was so influential on presidential elections and political elections, had become so influential, those who were in power at the time had to find a way to remove the church from being able to prop up who became president and what was allowed by law to take place in the system, in the White House. Does that make sense? And out of that was born, and you can Google it later, but out of that was born the Johnson rule, or the Johnson, I think it's rule, not act, but the Johnson rule. And it did exactly what it was created to do. It literally took the voice from the church where the voice should be. All through history, what we need to understand is that all through history, and I'm just giving a little background here, but all through history, now listen, 1964, that's the year I was born. So that wasn't very long ago. So we're talking about a very... What? Did you see the shoes that I'm wearing this morning? But that rule did exactly, Eric, what it was intended to do, and that was to silence the church because of the influence that the church had. Well, it did more than that. See, the purpose of the rule was to get the church out of politics. See, the government keeps telling us this lie about the separation of church and state, but this is really what it boils down to. The government wants the church out of the state, but they don't want the state out of the church. But they're not going to tell you that last part. It wants the church out of the state, but it wants to get as much of the state into the church as it possibly can, and that's what the Johnson rule did. How can we do this? We can get the state into the church. If we can get the state into the church, we can begin to influence what believers believe. We can divide the largest entity of people that there are in the United States, and we can begin to get them to fight against each other. We can divide them. You have to understand that was the purpose and the intent of this rule, and it has worked. Since that first election, it has been successful. In each successive election, it has been more and more successful until the factions in the church world today are so extreme. One group doesn't know what another believes, and the church has come to the place where it no longer, Christians, quote-unquote Christians, no longer vote so much based on word and spirit. Now they vote on whether or not they get kickbacks. Now that Christians are voting on whether or not this president or this candidate can provide for me something I might not deserve, or this candidate can give me the opportunity to... I'm trying to be very cautious how I wander down this path. But the church has become very divided, and it has focused its attention less on whether or not a given candidate really holds within them any of their moral values. It's less about moral values, and when you boil it down, listen to what I'm about to say, it's more about which of them will give me more money. That's the truth. Which of them will give me more money? In what way? Which of them is going to give it this way? Which of them is going to give it this way? How am I going? Which of them will let me do the least for the most? And they both offer opportunities for those choices. Both candidates. Whether it's Republican, Democrat, even independents. Whether it's Republican, it doesn't matter. They both offer opportunities for you and me to take sides. This one might give it this way. This one gives it through welfare, but this one gives it through something else, another means. This one gives it through welfare. This one gives it through tax cuts. One way or another, one of them is going to find a way to try to win your vote by ultimately getting you where you feel it the most, and that is in your money. Because money, or the love of it, is, as we know, it is the root of all evil, and it is that very principle, and that is the fulcrum point that divides the church, and the whole church is teetering on that point. Whether it be in this election, the elections before now, or the elections that will follow after this. Do you hear me this morning? So I want to talk about some of these this morning. I want to talk about the church. I want to talk about the White House. And I want to talk about our place in the church today and where we stand. I've already voted. I'll tell you that. I've already voted. I voted because I'll be in Cuba during the election, so I'll be gone. But I've already cast my vote. For me, it was an easy vote this year. I don't like either candidate. I'll just tell you straight up. If you were a part of the conversation in my house, I don't care for either candidate. I don't care for any of the options that are there today because neither of them, especially the two primaries, neither of them, neither Clinton nor Trump, represent my moral code. I can tell you by a long shot. Neither of them represent my moral code. But at the end of the day, what I based my vote on was, at the end of the day, I had to find out what is for me and in my heart and what I believe that the Father wants to do with the church. With the church. You need to hear what I'm saying. What is it that the Father wants to do with the church? Which of these candidates can more closely align believers that call themselves believers? Which of these candidates? Now, some of this is going to be odd to you that I'm even saying it. But which of these candidates can more closely align it, and what policies would each of these enact that would more enable the church to be able to once again become the voice that it was from the beginning and is meant to be to the very end? Which of these candidates will enable that? So I look. And I can tell you that as I looked, I came to a conclusion. There was more than that I based it on, but that was the gist. And I came to a conclusion, and I cast my vote. I cast my vote last week. I mailed it in. It's done. And I went through, and let me just say this before I go any further, since I'm talking about politics. I told you today's going to be different. It's going to be, I want to have discussion too. So let me just say this. When you are voting in the ballot box, will you do me a favor? Don't be the guy that just fills in a blank because you don't know who they are. If you haven't studied, it's clear, it makes it easy to decide which presidential candidates you're going to vote for. That becomes pretty simple because you can't help but hear about it. But when you start getting down to amendments and you start getting down to judges and Senate or whatever else, if you don't know who they are, please don't just fill in a box. I literally had a conversation with somebody the other day. When I don't know who they are, I just fill in the box. Really? You're the last person I want casting a vote. That's why we're in this mess. And there were boxes on the ballot I didn't fill out. I didn't fill in. Because I did my best. I went in and I researched every single person that was on that ballot. I had my ballot at my house. And you probably got one. And I know this might bore some of you. Just listen to me. I got my ballot at the house. And I already knew who I was voting for president, but I went down the list and I researched every single, I went to the Florida.gov site and I went through every single person, and I found out where are they, what are they saying, what do they believe, what is their past voting record, what have they done, does it reflect what I believe reflects the church? And then I voted accordingly. And more than that, I also wanted to know, not only do they call themselves believers, because that holds about as much weight as a thumbtack, and I thought, not only do they call themselves believers, but do they actually show up? Do they actually do their job? And do they vote for things? Do they balance a checkbook? That's one of my first priorities. I'm a business-minded person, so by default, I go back to, can you balance a checkbook? If you've never done that, I can tell you right now, you'll never get my vote. You'll never get my vote. Because you don't need to be doing that. You don't need to be running a company if you can't balance a stinking checkbook. And America's a company. If you don't believe that, don't vote. America's a company. It can go bankrupt, it can succeed, and it can fail. So I went through, don't vote for who you don't know. Now, let's talk about the church in the White House. I want to use some scripture this morning that really points to who we are. I don't want anybody uncomfortable about what I will say or won't say. I'm going to read something this morning in a moment from a survey that was done during this election, or during the whole series of primaries and what have you. But before I do anything else, I want to tell you this. In America, we are the largest, those who call themselves believers, once again, are the largest entity in the United States. Let me bring that into perspective. Really, I don't know, of all the people that call themselves believers, how many really are. I don't know. But there's at least, what we know to be true, 83% of all Americans claim to be believers. Whether they are or not, they at least have the guts to at least claim it. You hear me? At least they're courageous enough to say, I believe Jesus Christ is Savior, and I believe I'm saved. Whether that they are, hey, we'll leave that between them and the Father. But I can tell you at least 83% of Americans, 83%, as of July, claim to be believers. 83%. Now, let me just put this into perspective. If 83% that claim to be believers were united in a cause, what in the world would happen? They could vote me as president. I don't want to be president. But you might want to be. And you might be more qualified. There's people in this room more qualified than either of those people. %. You've got to get that with me. How is it that 83% of U.S. citizens now, that's citizens, can claim to be believers, and they can't even agree on where they would like their group of believers to go? They can't even agree on a direction. That's why in Psalm 133, you're very familiar with this. You probably don't even need to turn there, neither do I, but I will. It says, behold, how good and how pleasant it is when the brethren dwell together in unity. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is when for the brethren, to dwell together in unity, to be of one mind and to be of one spirit. How amazing that is. There are people, the church world today is at odds. They will stand up and fight one another over a government that is Babylonian, run by Babylonians. Babylon in Scripture simply means confusion, and it's run by confused people. But they will fight over a Babylonian government, argue over it, be divided over it, spend more time talking about that than they do about asking the Father, what do you really want us to do? Do you hear me? Go with me, if you would, to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And let's get into some nitty-gritty, in case we haven't already. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Verse 12, for as the body is one, and it has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether we're Jews or whether we are Greeks, whether we're slaves or whether we're free. We've all been made to drink into one Spirit. For in fact, the body is not one member, but it is many. For in fact, the body is not one member, but it is many. Now, I'm going to read something here in just a second. Let me say something here. I want to read you a quote. Now, regardless of who your preference is, your political candidate preference is, I'm going to read a quote from one of them that I thought it's striking when one of the candidates is able to recognize what I'm talking about this morning. This is a statement that was made about a year and a half, right at the beginning of the whole process. But this candidate made this comment, and it was striking to me then, striking enough to where I remembered it, found it, and I'm going to quote it today. And it's a quote by Donald Trump. This was the quote. Let me back up and say this first. I want to read this statement that I had written down. The very church that relishes unity is the same church that can't agree on anything, therefore changes little. In other words, the reason that the church has lost its power and authority in the United States today, or in the world for that matter, is because the church never agrees on anything and has become a puppet to everyone else. We have allowed ourselves in our position, in our thoughts, in our beliefs, in our voting records, we have allowed ourselves to come to the place where we have allowed the government, Babylon, to take control of who we are and to decide what we can and cannot say and do. And they're doing it more and more, and more and more, and more and more, and they will continue to do so. Donald Trump said this on December 30th of 2015. Quote, people who identify themselves as Christian make up probably the single largest constituency in the country, and that is a true statement. But there is absolutely no unity and no punch in the Christian group, not in political consensus or any other area that I can see. Never has a more true statement been made. Let me read it again. People who identify themselves as Christian make up probably the single largest constituency in the country, but there is absolutely no unity, no punch in the Christian group, not in political consensus or any other area that I can see. He made that statement on December the 30th of 2015. Now, why did he make that statement? Because it's a true statement. One of the things you got to love about Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, is that Donald Trump doesn't care what he says. And it's a true statement. He's not pandering. He's simply saying this is the way it is. The church, you're supposed to be strong. This isn't a group of a bunch of pastors that were gathered together. He said, you're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be a voice. They might as well cut your tongue out. Couldn't do any more damage. Because you don't gather together, you don't group together, you don't stand for your morals, you stand for money, but you don't stand for morals. What's the church going to do about that? In fairness, I tried to find a quote that from the other side, from the Clinton side, that would be similar to this, but absolutely could not find one. Now, just to be fair. So, what is it that the church has lost? This is the thing. The church has lost its ability to be a voice because even within the church, you take government out of it, you take Babylon out of it, the church can't even decide on doctrine. The church struggles to decide on whether or not there's a Trinity or oneness. We've had this discussion recently. The church struggles to define whether or not you can pray in tongues or you can't. The church can't agree on whether or not Jesus really did suffer, die, and arose, or was he just some good prophet? Church can't even decide. Do you know the difference between an evangelical Protestant and a mainline Protestant? Does anybody know the difference? When you hear the words in this political cycle, and you hear the words in just generally on the news, let me explain to you in gist the difference between an evangelical, say evangelical Protestant, and a mainline Protestant. Mainline Protestants, one, do not believe that Scripture is infallible. There's a few specific differences. Two, mainline Protestants do not believe necessarily that Jesus Christ died and arose. They believe more along the lines that he was a prophet and he could forgive sins, and it's possible that he is the Messiah, but there's a chance that he's not. But they call themselves believers. Mainline Protestants do not believe in the born-again conversion experience. They do not believe in that experience. Those are the three principal differences between mainline Protestant and evangelicals. And when you hear, there's others too, most evangelicals believe in this thing that the church calls the rapture of the church, healing, some of these things that mainline Protestants do not believe in. So there's a number of things. But in gist, evangelicals believe absolutely and in every way that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and he is our way to the Father. Mainline Protestants believe that he is a good man, very possibly the Son of God. Did he die and rose? They don't die and then rise again. They don't really care. What matters to them is that they do enough good works, that they know him, and they get to be a part of heaven. That's really the difference. So evangelicals and mainline Protestants are separated primarily by the fact of who Jesus Christ is, whether or not there's a second coming, and whether or not there's healing and some of these other things that we hold dear. We would be considered evangelical Protestant believers. That's what we would be considered. Even though in areas there's some disagreement or some difference, generally speaking, there is no difference, not generally, profoundly speaking, there is no difference in the fact that I believe that Jesus Christ is the only way to know the Father. That agreement alone separates me from a mainline Protestant. So they're all included in this, believers. So keep that in mind. All of them, whether you're mainline Protestant, you believe in Jesus, you're just not sure who he is, you believe in God, you believe in the heavens, you just have a different way of getting there. And so there's all of this that separates them. So I want to read to you this because it is important this morning. Before we enter into discussion, I have some statements that I'm going to want to make here in a moment. But let me read this first. This is a quote. This is an article out of ABC News Online let's see. Oh, I didn't date it. I should have dated it. But it's ABC News Online. It's recent. And the title of the article is Most Americans Say They're Christian, and it's written by Gary Langer. I need to give credit where credit is due. It says this: ask Americans their religion and you'll get an earful. 50 individual answers in an ABC News BeliefNet poll, ranging from agnostics to Zen Buddhists. The vast majority, though, have something in common: Jesus Christ. 83% of Americans identify themselves as Christians. Most of the rest, 13%, have no religion at all. That leaves just 4% as adherents of all non-Christian religions combined, which would be Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and a smattering of individual mentions. That's quite different from the world at large. 52% of the world's population is non-Christian, compared to 4% in the United States. And 1/3 is Christian, compared to 83% in the United States. These are rough comparisons because the world figures reported by the Encyclopedia Britannica are for the full population, while the U.S. figures are among only adults. This poll used an open-minded question to gauge religious affiliation. What, if anything, is your religion? That's the question. Most of the 50 affiliations cited are Christian denominations ranging from the Assembly of God to the United Church of Christ. Added up, they show that 53% of Americans are Protestants, 22% Catholics, and 8% other Christians, such as Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't consider Jehovah's Witnesses Christian. If you're here and you're Jehovah's Witness today, my encouragement to you would be to repent, get saved, and change. The largest group within the ranks of American Protestants is unaffiliated. 19% of Americans say they're Protestants, but don't cite a specific denomination. They account for more than a third of all Protestants. Another 15% of Americans identify themselves as Baptists or Southern Baptists, meaning this group accounts for nearly 3 in 10 Protestants. No other Protestant denomination comes close in size. Baptists are especially prevalent among black Americans. Nearly half of blacks, 48%, say they're Baptists. I didn't know that. I did not know that. Did y'all know? Did you know that? You did? I never knew that. Nearly half of blacks, 48%, say they're Baptists, making it far and away their number one denomination. Next are non-denominational at 15% of blacks and Methodists, 8% of Methodists, which are 8% of blacks. Among whites, 22% are Catholics, another 22% are non-affiliated Protestants, and 13% are Baptists. I would have thought it would have been exactly the opposite. Because it seemed like every white person I know that doesn't go to the Rock is Baptist. Blacks, who are overwhelmingly Christian, are also more likely than whites to have any religion at all. Just 3% of blacks say they have no religion, compared to 13% of whites. No religion includes people who describe their religion as atheist or agnostic. 6% of Americans say they're Methodists, including African Methodists and United Methodists. 5% say they're Lutherans. No other Protestant denomination was named by more than 2% of respondents. 37% of all Christians describe themselves as born again or evangelical, what I was talking about earlier. That includes nearly half of all Protestants, 47%, as well as a small share, 14% of Catholics. Baptists again dominate. 62% of Baptists say they're evangelical Christians, compared to 46% of all other Protestant denominations combined, and 37% of non-denominational Protestants. You don't have to remember all these figures. Remember the sense of what I'm saying here. Evangelism soars, particularly among blacks and Southerners. 2/3 of blacks describe themselves as evangelical or born-again Christians, double the share of whites who do so. 55% of Christians in the South say they're born again, compared to 21% in the Northeast, 26% in the Midwest, and 31% in the West. Which is amazing. Well, let me not say that because that would violate something. Lower income Christians also are more apt to be evangelicals. Among those with household incomes under $35,000, 45% are evangelicals. Among those with higher incomes, this declines to 31%. More broadly, Protestants tend to have lower incomes than Catholics. 49% of evangelical Protestants have incomes under $50,000, as do 43% of non-evangelical Protestants, compared to 36% of Catholics. Income correlates with education. That's true always, 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 always true. 99.9% of the time, income will always correlate to your degree of education. If you don't like your income, get educated. Let's not go there. 36% of Catholics are college graduates. That declines to 23% of Protestants and 17% of Baptists. There's an enormous political difference between evangelical and non-evangelical people, church believers, on some issues. One is abortion. 62% of evangelical Protestants say it should be illegal in all or most cases. By contrast, 65% of non-evangelical Protestants say abortion should be legal, as do 55% of Catholics. Catholics don't even know what Catholics believe because one of their very tenets, that's a violation of. The difference narrows in terms of ideology more broadly. 44% of white evangelical Protestants say they're conservative on most political matters. That compares to 33% of white non-evangelical Protestants and white Catholics alike. Blacks are different in this regard. Just 24% of blacks say they're conservative politically. And among people who have no religion, only 19% are conservatives. There's even less. It's amazing to me that 33% of white and 24% of blacks consider themselves to be conservative. It astounds me that only 33%, what's the average of that? 33, 24, 77 divided by 2 is what, 36? Let's say 36, 35, 30, 34. Let's say 34. The average, 34% of believers, white and black, consider themselves conservative. If nothing else in this tells us anything, that should. 34%. That means 66% of believers are looking for a handout or looking for an opportunity to correct their pregnancies through abortion or whatever else. 66%. That really riles me. I'm going to say to the 66%, I don't believe you're a believer. You cannot be a believer and a non-conservative. Vote that. It's not possible. You can't do it. You can't do it. It's not possible. You can't. There's even less difference between evangelical non-white Protestants and political party identification. 40% of white evangelical Protestants identify themselves as Republican, as do 34% of I'm independent. I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. I am neither of those. I haven't been either of those for a long time. I've voted both ways, and I'm glad to be able to say that I have. I'm glad to be able to say that I have. So what I do and how I stand is, at the end of the day, what I am is, I can tell you I'm a conservative. I'm a conservative. And I am not going to violate that. I'm not giving up my conservative values. I'm not going to live them on Sunday morning and then vote differently on Tuesday afternoon. There's even less difference between evangelical and non-evangelical white Protestants and political party identification. 40% of white evangelical Protestants identify themselves as Republican, 34% of white non-evangelical Protestants. By contrast, only 5% of blacks and 11% of non-Christians are Republicans. Who knew only 5% of blacks are Republican? Who knew only 33% of whites are Republican? Is nobody surprised? It angers me. Because as it goes, let me just say this. I don't know if I'm violating anything by saying this or not. But I'm going to say this. As it goes currently, let me back up some time. The Democratic Party hasn't always been the liberal party. The Republican Party hasn't always been the conservative party. If you didn't know that, you know now. That there was a time when the roles were reversed. The danger of it is that people became a part of a party. When they became a part of a party, they sunk their nails into that party because mama was, sister was, cousin was, aunt was, grandma was, and grandma said, if I vote anything else, I'm in trouble. She'll disown me and won't cook my turkey on Thanksgiving. And they become a part of a political party instead of a part of a cause. People have abandoned their Christian values in an effort to get more from the guy that will give the most. While the parties have crisscrossed over time, what I can tell you today is the Democratic Party is not known to be conservative, and the Republican Party is not known to be liberal. The Democrats are way too liberal for some. The Republicans are way too conservative for others. What I'm going to tell you today is it's only right and purposed and reasonable to believe as believers. My God, don't violate, don't come in on Sunday morning, don't believe what you believe, don't teach your children what you believe about being a conservative Christian, and then go out on Tuesday afternoon and vote against the very morals you try to teach your kids at the table. I understand. Well, let me finish reading this. There's even less difference. Well, that was the end. But I made a statement after that. The entity called the church should be the single most powerful voice in the world when numbers are considered, yet it is the vast number that is relegated to shame through media, etc., because of the disconnect of believers. How does this change, and is unity possible? So, let me tell you something today. Let me just point out a couple things about both of our candidates that you're going to vote for in a couple of weeks. I won't tell you who I voted for. You can draw your own conclusions. If you try, you could be right, you could be wrong. What I will tell you is this. Neither of them, they can both stand up, and both of them are going to do it, and both of them have done it, and both of them are going to continue to do it. They're going to stand up and get behind a microphone and tell you how big of a Christian they are and how much they love God. One's groping women while saying it, and the other one's getting your kids killed over in Benghazi while saying it. One's destroying emails while talking about how much she loves God, and one's saying all the wrong things to women while he's talking about how much he loves God. So at the end of the day, when I look at both of these candidates, I think, you disgust me. Both of them. I look at him, and I look at her, and I think, you disgust me. It's unfortunate that either one of you have to be in office, and one of you will be. It's unfortunate that one of you have to represent the very country that I love. I'm very patriotic. I'm a very patriotic person. I love America. I love the good old US of A. I believe it was God's intent for us to be here, and I'm thankful for it. I don't know that we came about it the right way, but we're here, and I'm thankful for it. I'm very patriotic. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. But let me tell you about these candidates. It's irony to me when I think about some of the conflict that goes on in some of the things that they say and do. One of them is, on the Democratic Party, I think of this. Let me address them first. The Democratic Party talks about, they're always citing the Republican Party over and over and over again, and attacking the Republican Party, talking about how the Republican Party is racist. It's one of the biggest issues, the bigger issues of the election cycle this year. And the Democrats are always talking about how the Republican Party is racist. If anybody listening, and anybody considering the Democratic Party, because they're constantly attacking the Republicans, if you're considering the Democratic Party, keep this in mind. While they're pointing their fingers at the Republican Party and talking about how racist the Republican Party is and how much they don't love you and how much they don't like you if you're black or if you're a minority, consider this. There's never been a party in the history that has done more to divide the people based on the color of their skin than the Democratic Party that we currently have. No one discusses more the differences. No one points out more how sad you are if you're black, how pitiful you are. And this is the irony. In this, Donald Trump was true. He said, you stand behind that pulpit, Hillary Clinton, and you talk about how the black people are oppressed, and you talk about how we are doing nothing for the black community, and we're doing nothing for the Hispanic community or the Latinos, or so. You talk about that, and you point that out, yet you've been in government. And the Democratic Party has been really ruling this racial thing for decades now, and you've done nothing to change it. It has only gotten worse on your watch. You can't argue that. The facts are there. It cannot be argued. No party in the history of politics has ever done more to segregate and to point out, this many are our black supporters, this many are our white supporters. And they talk about it like the black community, the Democrats talk about it like the black community is a trophy in their case, not a human being with a right to choose who they vote for. They talk about you like you are expected to vote for them. And if you do anything else, you're foolish. Now, on the other hand, we have Donald Trump. We have the Republican Party. So in this regard, I'm all for the Republican Party. Because the Republican Party, if nothing else, they're doing more than any other. I don't like much of what they do, but more than any other, they're doing the most to eliminate the racial divide in this country. They're doing the best they can to, let me just leave it there, to eliminate the racial divide in this country. On the other hand, I look at Hillary Clinton. I look at the Democratic Party. And I think, what are they doing? Where is the hypocrisy here? Because where is the truth here? And how are they pointing out the hypocrisy of the Republican Party? Because here you have the Democrats, you have Hillary Clinton pointing at Donald Trump, and you have her saying to him, accusing him of his inability to lead, and the Republican Party's inability, jumping into wars too soon and too quickly, and putting the lives at risk. And she made the comment, she said, you talk about me getting this person killed over in Benghazi, but what about the Republicans that sent all these kids to war and we lost thousands of lives? And you look at that, and you look at how she begins to call out the Republican Party, because while the Republican Party, and then she points out again, dealing with abortion. And she comes up and she says, you don't believe that a mother has a right to choose, and what if the mother's life is in danger, and so on and so forth. And she plays to that. I can tell you this. I listened to her. That might surprise you. But I listen to her, and I sit there and I think, there's points that they're making. There's things that they're saying that really should be important to us. And she's calling him out. He's calling her out for the racial divide, which is true. She's calling him out for the lives that have been lost for no good reason, and she's right. She's right. Well, they're both right is relative. Let's leave it like that. So at the end of the day, when I'm preparing and I'm going through all of this, my thoughts are this. I cannot help but continue to fall back on we're the largest group of people in the United States. And we're more focused on racial issues. Now somebody might say, well, that's important. I don't think so. I'm not interested in racial issues. They're only there because we keep talking about them. I love you if you're black, yellow, pink, blue, I don't care. But politics keeps things alive because they know they can get votes because whatever they can keep alive, whether it be cutting taxes, and that's the thing I was going to talk about with Donald Trump. The cutting of taxes, I don't agree with all of it. I think they could be cut, but I don't think they could be cut like he wants to cut them. I think it'll be a travesty. I think it'll be terrible. So there's things that he's got going on I'm looking at and I'm thinking, in light of reality, I would love for you to cut all these taxes, but the truth is we've gotten ourselves into a pickle. And what's going to happen is if you cut them, the next president that comes in, now listen, I did vote, and I did. But I'm thinking, you cut these taxes, the next guy that comes in is going to be in trouble. But if I vote her in, then we're going to keep killing babies, and we're going to keep this racial thing alive, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse till we have another civil war, not among Americans, but among races. I don't want to live a life where I have to walk down the street and every time I see a black man, I wonder not whether or not he's mad at me because I'm white. And I don't think there's a black person in this building that wants to walk down the street wondering not whether when they run into a white guy or a white person, if their lives in danger. Would that be a true statement? None of us want to live that way. But we have two political parties. Keep in mind what I'm saying this morning. I hope by now you're absolutely confused about which way I think you should go. It will be clear in a moment. Not on a political party, but on your position. I will tell you this. I believe there is, unfortunately, only one political party that most closely aligns with where we are today. But as I look at both of these candidates, and they disgust me. Both of them. They disgust me. I've got one that can't tell the truth to save her life. She's never balanced a checkbook in her life. She thinks she lives in poverty with $53 million in her bank account. I'm still trying to figure that one out. She thinks she understands. Well, we're just doing the best that we can. Really? Give me some of that. Let me see how well I can do with it. And then I've got another one that doesn't really understand how to keep his mouth shut and doesn't really understand how to treat a woman. I don't believe all the stuff that they've said about him is true any more than I believe all the stuff they said about Hillary is true. That's the nature of politics. Man, they make things up they'll take a speck and make it a log. But there's a little bit of all of it that's true. So while I'm wandering around up here in front of the building today, what I'm trying to tell you this morning is you need to remember who you are. And if you define yourself as Republican or you define yourself as Democrat, you've lost your way. You've forgotten who you are and what kingdom you actually represent. You are not part of the Democratic kingdom and you are not part of the Republican kingdom. And if you ever vote strictly for political reasons, strictly because you think you'll get this or they'll get that, I can tell you you'll be disappointed every time. In fact, I'll say it this way. I don't think there's anybody in this room that in your lifetime you have ever voted and found out that the person you voted for gave you everything you wanted. In fact, I know it's never happened. In the history of the United States, it's never happened. And it's never going to happen. But what I do know is this: those who put their trust in the Father will lay their head down in peace and will rise up in peace. And at the end of the day, at the end of this day, at the end of tomorrow, I believe that I'm a morally sound and conservative individual. When I say conservative, I'm conservative in this sense. Not conservative in the sense that I believe we need to go back to sandals and togas. But my moral compass has not been lost. And while I look at both of these candidates and I try to figure out where they're going, there is one that is clearly going one way and another that is clearly going another. There is a great divide between the two. When you vote, do not vote because you've always been a Democrat or because you've always been a Republican. Do not vote because you like her or because you like him. Because if you do, I'm worried about you. They would never be invited to I would be afraid for my kids to be around their conversation. Either of them. You vote because you know who you are. But vote. Vote because you know who you are. You're not voting for the next preacher in chief. Because neither of them will ever reach that place. You're voting for someone to lead this country that we love. And if we don't start as a people, think about this, working for what we get, we will deserve what we get. Did you hear me? If we as a people, I can't talk to anybody else except for the believers that are in this room today, but if we do not begin to come to the place where we take responsibility and we work and we labor for what we get, you will deserve what you get. Well, I don't think, let me throw a curveball. Cutting taxes, at least to the extent, there's some areas it would be nice, but to the extent that the Republicans are talking about, well, I don't think that's a great idea. I can assure you raising taxes is absolutely the wrong idea. How much more money do you want to give them? The government. How much more money? Because there's never going to be enough. There was a king that was quoted one time as making this statement. I don't know who the king was, but he made this statement. He said, I don't want all the land in the world. I just want whatever land is touching my land. So every time he would conquer this land, now there's something else touching his. He would conquer that land. Then whatever land touched that, he would conquer that. So I don't want it all. I just want what's touching mine. That's what we're dealing with in politics. They don't want it all. They just want whatever's touching theirs. And there is one side that is doing everything they can to turn this nation once again, not into a republic, not into a democracy, but into a place where you become so dependent upon the government. One party is all government. One party is people. Now, people who don't like to take responsibility prefer that the government take responsibility. The price will be paid. If you're not willing to work for it today, you'll regret it later. Do you hear me? I can't tell you who to vote for, but I can tell you this. While neither of those candidates, in fact, neither of those candidates can, I don't trust either one of them. I don't know either one of them. I have no trust in them. I don't even trust the system. I don't trust the system. But what I do trust is the Holy Spirit of God in me. And if I can vote and my conscience is clear, I have rendered to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and I'm letting God take care of the rest. Do you hear me today? Don't go in there blindly. And don't go in there just because of whatever you've done in the past. I can tell you emphatically this nation is on the wrong course. It's headed in the wrong direction. You don't need me to tell you that. You know that. You know that when you get your paycheck. You know that when you watch TV and you see more and more of what liberal ideas are bringing to your airwaves, make your children watch. You know that more and more if you have children in school, what the liberal system wants your children to read in school when they're 8. You know more and more when you're in school and the liberal system wants your children to make a decision in kindergarten whether or not they're boy or girl. The nature of who we are as believers is not liberal. We are conservative. We are conservative people. We are conservative in our morals. We are conservative in our faith because we believe in something that is simple. And that is, if I will trust Him, He will take care of the rest. But whatever part you have in taking care of that and helping and doing, do with a pure heart and with clean hands. Do you hear me today? I want to do something. I hope I haven't violated. I tried my best not to lean one way or the other. I tried to be fair both ways, but it's very difficult because I'm a conservative. I'm a conservative because I'm a Christian, because I'm a believer. I'm not the kind that says it on Sunday morning and then does something different the next day. I actually am a conservative. I'll be a conservative when I get up tomorrow. I'll still be a conservative when I go to bed next week, when I come in. It's who I am. I'm sick and tired of the racial thing. I'm sick and tired of it being used to divide the nation. There's not a racial issue. There's a people talking too much about it issue. Disgusts me. Disappoints me. Because I believe we still live in a great nation. And I believe it can be even greater. And the Father's calling you and me to responsibility. Don't take it lightly.